I'm Chad Ruthermond.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And welcome to NOCLIP Pocket, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. Today, on a very special and final episode of NOCLIP Pocket, we're going to be talking about Super Mario Land, a game that was developed by Nintendo R&D 1, published by Nintendo, and released in 1989 on the Game Boy.
But first, if you give us a like or a rating, it would be greatly appreciated.
But firster, Andy, what happened? Everyone's up in arms, shocked.
Happy 100 episodes of NOCLIP Pocket.
100 episodes.
Yeah. It's been a while now, and it feels weird because when we used to have 3 hosts on the main podcast, and when the third host left, we for some reason decided we had too much free time, and we were going to start doing a second show. So yeah, that is less appealing to us now at this point in our lives. And also, there used to, I feel like, at least in my head anyway, I don't know, felt like there was more of a difference between what we would pick for the main podcast and what we would pick for Pocket, and that's really eroded over time. So
it's just gone now. There's no separation whatsoever.
Yeah, so we were hitting this milestone. We knew it was coming up, so we were like, why not just end it and be open to doing shorter games for the main podcast and not really categorize it by length like we had been.
Yeah. And what does this mean for you, the listener?
Absolutely
pretty much nothing. Yeah. You're going to get to hear our great new theme song by Zane more often, because that will show up on every episode. We're trying to schedule kind of in the same way. It's just we're being a little loosier, and one might even say goosier.
Definitely.
With the way that we're structuring the episode. So essentially, like, the difference between Pocket and the main podcast in reality was that Pocket didn't have a break. It wasn't like they were that much shorter. We've had regular episodes just under an hour long, and we've had Pocket episodes that were an hour and a half.
Right.
Or longer. So the like you said, the difference eroded away into literally nothing. So we're just combining them again. And there's a while where I was just like, Pocket's like my favorite show to make, because the games are usually more like, they are faster. Yes, that's a big thing, but a lot of them are more interesting because they were just like, we would pick shit like Dujana or like Tamashi that would be these like out there bizarro weird games, and I wanted to cover those, but now we can just do that whenever we want it and not worry about it.
Right.
But yeah, that's it. I don't spend like a huge amount of time on it. This is the 100th episode of Pocket, but I don't think that it should be a meta commentary episode.
Right.
If you do have anything to say about it, you want to commemorate it, Pocket is going to be lifted into the rafters with our old theme song and us saying high quality on every episode, and JJ and doing bits at the beginning of episodes. Yeah. As bygone things of the past that are beyond their use, especially JJ.
Right. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, exactly. Amen. Here. But yeah, if you do have anything to say, let us know on our Discord or leave it in a comment. If you only listen to it as a podcast and do not engage with any other form of internet communication, you can send us an email if you want. But yeah, we'll talk about it there. But for now, Super Mario Land is a 2D platformer and is the prequel to the game that we did as the first episode of Pocket, Super Mario Land 2.
Yeah, and it's also older than both of us. And is it the oldest game we've ever talked about?
This came up once before. It's Dragon's Lair. Was like 19...
Yep.
It was like 1900, I think, is when that game came out.
1900 to 1112 is when that game came out.
Yeah, because that was like a purely arcade thing.
Right.
And it is, and you're going to discover this, dear listener, as we go through the episode. There are a lot of good reasons to talk about older games. There's also a really good reason to not talk about older games. Oftentimes, there's not much to them. And our level of analysis typically doesn't touch upon impact to the industry or like the development of the game. There's literally another show called NOCLIP you can go to for that information. So yeah, it is a 2D platformer, and boy oh boy is it one. It is notable because it's on the Game Boy, but that's yeah.
I thought I got surprisingly got a few good notes out of it. I was a little worried based on what I knew about it. I think I had a cousin that had this game, so I played it before, but I didn't own it myself. I had Super Mario Land 2, and played that a bunch as a kid. But yeah, I knew that this looked like way simpler graphically. And it's almost it's like amazing that they both came out on the same system, because it's like night and day. The amount of detail in the game art. But no, I found it to still be surprisingly playable based on what I expected from what it looks like.
For sure. I have an old cartridge version of this game, and it was a game that I played occasionally when I was very young. Like you mentioned up at the top, this game is older than both of us.
Just barely.
So it was not one that I jumped back to a lot on the Game Boy. And when I did play it, it was I was probably 6 or 7, though and maybe 8, I don't know, in that zone. Mm-hmm. I will say, hysterically, I made a discovery, which is I knew that there was a level that I was never able to get past as a kid, which is classic. I couldn't beat Chemical Zone in Sonic 2 until I was a teenager. So I was pretty bad at these.
Yeah, most games for me, I don't know about other people, but most games for me as a kid I didn't beat.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I think I beat Pokemon, and there's a handful of things, but most games went unfinished.
I wonder if that is part of the reason why Pokemon is such a touchstone game for people in our age range, within a couple years of us, because as children, yeah, that was the only game I could beat, because it was so it was. RPGs generally are mostly designed with that curve over a long period. This is platformers. It's they just get hard, and you need to develop motor skills.
You
before
can
you can get
grind
there.
out an advantage in an RPG, and you can't do that in a platformer.
Unfortunate. Yeah, so I found out that there was a level that I knew I couldn't get past as a kid, and now, fucking 25 years later, I'm reasonably certain that it was the last level of the game.
Oh no, so close yet so far away.
And I didn't know. I had no idea that I was on the last level of the game either time, which was fun. But yeah, pretty nostalgic though. I hadn't gone back to this game in decades, so it was interesting to play it. I agree, surprisingly playable.
Yeah, and then just because I brought up visuals a couple of times, it seems like a good thing to do up front. I was surprised how much the theming came through, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Given how just dead simple 8-bit this game looks, because the idea that it's Super Mario Land, right? Not Super Mario World, not Super Mario Brothers. It's you get the concept that Mario's in a foreign land. I feel it's impressive how well that comes through with such little visual information. It immediately feels different than Super Mario Brothers. So I think they nailed that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also really amusing to tie it in with the visuals as well. There's some enemies in later levels of the game that do such a good job of communicating what they are, and they're enemies in the first level of the game that are specifically enemies from other Mario games that look like nothing. Like a Goomba in this game is like literally just like a black square. And same with like the Koopa Troopas, which now explode when you jump on them instead of creating a shell.
Yeah, I found that to be interesting.
It was my first death.
Yeah. Like, I feel like that's it. I assume it's because of limitations. Like, they couldn't draw the sprite like moving like it does in regular Super Mario Brothers. So they made it explode. I thought that was an interesting like take on, because I'm used to it always working the same in every game. So I thought it was interesting to see a Koopa work differently in a game. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, it was very surprising. But like, yeah, and they end up being the ones. I mean, Koopas still read fine. Koopas are a really elegant design. Goombas have never really been an elegant design. They were just sort of fine.
Yeah, like a half circle with feet.
Yeah, somebody has made a 4-hour video essay about why Goombas are the best enemies ever generated for a video game, but I haven't seen it, and I'm not sure that I know the nuances that would make that true. But yeah, in this game, it's like Koopas are nothing at all. I think there's only like 2 Goombas in the whole game.
Yeah, they pop up every now and then.
Yeah, but then you get like a fucking Easter Island head that rolls in, or the big spiders, and they all look really good for being on the Game Boy. And it is interesting, like you said, to compare it to the sequel, because they were both Game Boy games, but in Super Mario Land 2, everything is zoomed way in, so you have a lot more detail on stuff. And in this one, Mario is very small most of the time, but all of the enemies seem very large because they wanted to include those details. So it's impressive in both, but it is also a crazy difference between the two.
Yeah. Like, yeah, Mario Land 2 just looks like it's on the next console. You know, like, it is wild it's on the same hardware. It's like that big of a leap. Yeah, but like one thing, like the Easter Island head enemies that you brought up, like this game, one way I don't like that they chose to like implement difficulty in the game is they will have enemies that just kind of sporadically like fling at you. And you have like the tiny resolution of the Game Boy screen. So you don't have a lot of time to see them coming, especially those Easter Island head guys that just run at you. So that rubbed me the wrong way. It's not terrible. It could have been way worse because they use it sparingly enough. But like it felt like a pretty cheap way to like make the game harder.
Yeah, I would agree. It's hard to sort of like judge difficulty for me in this because like part of it felt like that. Like they would just be like, here's an enemy that basically will always kill you the first time that it shows up.
Yeah.
Whether or not it ever kills you again is like, maybe it doesn't matter to them. I found the odd angles. There's like a seahorse enemy who shows up in the underwater level and doesn't shoot fireballs. But when they're the non-underwater level, it does shoot fireballs, which is weird. And technically it does shoot fireballs like once or twice in the underwater section, but it's not like its main bag. And it was interesting, like you would run up, and because they shoot the fireball when they jump out, it's impossible for you to predict where that fireball's gonna go. And so like, yeah, that one will get you. The guy who runs at you gets you. There's some like
little moth guys that like float at you.
Yeah, I wish I knew the names of these enemies. But yeah, those also will do that. They're enemies that follow you. There's like an enemy that just seems to be like a person.
Oh yeah. In the bamboo forest levels.
Yeah, and if you jump on them, they collapse, but they act like a dry bone, so they'll get back up and come after you again. If you don't know that, there's a chance that gets you as well. And then the other thing is, I just don't know if the levels were designed in a way to make you die, or if the level design just wasn't as good as it later became, and I'm judging it from a place of being in the future.
It is hard to say. There are a couple of things about the design that I don't know if it's intentional or not. Because like I think the game starts out pretty well designed, and then I think the further in it gets, it seems like maybe they are like intentionally like play testing it and adjusting the tiles and things to like make you jump into a pit or into an enemy. Like there's one of the levels in, I think it's like World 3, where you're like going through like a cave type level, and like there were like multiple times each like new section of the level I would get to, like I'd be like I would play right into the designer's hands, and like I would like jump onto a platform and then like a spider jumps at me and I jump into it, and like it's like it was designed for it to happen that way. Right. So it does kind of seem like maybe they did lean into that sort of thing, probably to try and like make the game a little longer, because I mean it was still the 80s technically, so that arcade design probably still had a little bit of a foothold
for sure. And it is like you said, it is the 80s. It is like 3 years after Super Mario Brothers came out
at least. What was that, 85?
It might have been 85, so it'd be 4 years. I wanted to say 80s. This is something whatever. We could easily look up, but
we'll say it came out in 85 in Japan and 86 in the US.
Perfect. Both might be wrong. We'll find out. Andy was more correct here. It was 1985 for both Japan and the US. Curse you, Andy! But yeah, so it was so soon after that, and it's not like platformers had taken a foothold in the sense that like design trends were obvious, but it's funny to see like in Super Mario Brothers secret pathways being introduced that are well designed. Things like in 1-2, how you could get above the level and run to the warp pipes is kind of a big thing. And influenced a lot of game design going forward, and acted as a checkpoint system in a game that didn't have saves. And then you also have like pipe bonus areas. I don't know what you want to call them when you go down a pipe and then there's an area with coins.
Bonus area,
yeah. And then in Super Mario Land you have above the level shortcuts that just sort of terminate in nothing. And pipe areas where you can die, which feels really strange for what like their intended purpose was in the original game. Not to say this is like a bad platformer. I grew up in the 90s. I've played an infinite number of platformer games, and 80% of them are much worse than this is. It was just weird seeing it coming from the perspective of like, I'm playing a Mario game, which is something that I have like sort of an innate sense for what that should be. And it felt very different to me.
It definitely feels like a little bit similar to like Link's Awakening, or it feels experimental. Like it like the it feels like they told the team to like do whatever in a way that is like nowadays very not Nintendo in attitude, but like it definitely, you can see that reflected in the final product for sure.
And yet Mario Land 2 is the one where we ended up with whale cholesterol as an element of level design.
They figured out the hardware a lot better, so they were able to be more creative. One thing you mentioned is the checkpoint system in the original Super Mario Brothers with the warp pipes or the warp zone or whatever.
Right.
I thought it was interesting in this game. This is another thing. I don't know what the intent was, but I assume like the checkpoint system's much more forgiving in this. Like you'll make it a certain amount of the way, you'll die, and then you'll only get set back like a little bit. And my guess was it's because the game can't have the whole level loaded into memory, or
Right.
they would have sent you back to the beginning. But that's just my speculation. Like, so I think that's an interesting outcome from the limitations. That because I really liked that as a modern player. That like I would die on a level and then only be set back a little bit. Because yeah, as far as I know, like since Super Mario World, we've had the halfway checkpoint in platformer levels. So yeah, it was another thing where it was like that's so set in stone for Mario that it was interesting to see something different. Much like the Koopas. So yeah, like I think it was unintentional. Like but I liked the outcome personally.
Yeah, I imagine they probably could have sent you back to the beginning without any issue, but I imagine that setting you back to certain points may have had hardware limitations. I do also think like there are a lot of knobs in difficulty tuning, and taking into account the smaller screen size of the Game Boy and low resolution, they may have just implemented a very forgiving checkpoint system for the sake of making that a bit more forgiving. The fact that the hardware itself wasn't able to display the levels in a way to make it easier.
Right, you have like less time to react to stuff, so you might die more.
So they made death less punishing. Though I will say sometimes death, in this game, I have died and then been transported forward in the level.
Yeah, but just by like a little bit.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, so I missed this jump and then appear on the other side of the jump because I guess I was close enough to whatever the breakpoint was for it, which I found interesting.
But yeah, I don't know. That was most of my notes, though.
I think there's one major note, three.
Oh, I also wanted to mention the music. That was my one last thing. But yeah, you take the floor. You take the floor.
To me, the music is like, that's the biggest thing left. The fucking like main theme to this song, fucking rules. Like, I love that tune. I wish that it would replace all ice cream truck music from here on out. That's like the vibe I get from it. And I love it. And so I do just want to mention that. But also I like the fact that more so than in other Mario games, the different worlds of this game, of which there are only 4, they try to mimic real world places or like parts of sort of mythology or however you want to put it. Basically, there's like a water world, cool. But then there's also like just Easter Island.
Right.
and
like
just
Egypt.
China. Yeah, there's an Egypt level. Like, these are like real places that are being sort of re-envisioned as Mario worlds, and they changed the music up to match those, and I found that it was pretty effective overall. Though the 1-1 theme, which also appears in a couple of other places, is just the best song in the game.
It is great. I liked pretty much all of the tracks were really great, I thought. The underground theme is really good. And yeah, like, I don't know. There's something like I said, I did technically play this game as a kid, but like for all intents and purposes, I really didn't, because it was just like a game that I played like at family gatherings or whatever. But like it has that like nostalgic quality, like immediately. If you played games in the early 90s and you're used to the chiptune like Game Boy and NES and Super Nintendo like sound fonts or whatever, it immediately hits that chord. It plays the secret chord that David played, and it does in fact please the Lord.
It pleases me anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought the music was great. One thing though that was really strange to me, and it's another thing that was a little difference in this that I'm not used to with Mario, is the Power Star theme is different. It's like it's a piece of classical music. I don't remember which one now, off the top of my head. But that just felt so wrong to like get a star and the music not be like the theme.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it's so shocking to have that happen. First of all, getting a star in this game is a non-trivial matter because every power-up just wants to jump off of a cliff immediately for whatever reason, and stars are especially bad about it. But it was only like the second game question mark citation needed to have stars. And
Fair
so
point.
there wasn't a precedent set. But then you go back and play it now. Like, you know that if they did like a Super Mario All-Stars style re-release of this game, which they might have, I didn't look into it, they would just put the star music in 100%. Like, there's no way they're playing the song that's, I mean, which is essentially just royalty-free actual music in the way that a Game Boy could do that. So yeah, I fully agree with you. It was like picking up the star and hearing not the Superstar music, like fucking, like there was a beat where I just like didn't process it.
Yeah. It's also
was
uncanny because it's a piece of classical music that you recognize as well. So it's like
Right.
still familiar, but also different. And you're just like, your brain does short circuit for a second.
Yep, it's so strange. But yeah, there were two other things that I wanted to talk about, and they are kind of related. One is the fact that this game has bosses in like weird, like two of them are bosses in a more video game sense that we consider now, and then two of them are Mario bosses, which means that they're a boss that is dangerous and you just have to jump over them and hit the thing on the other side and you win.
Right.
But it was interesting seeing bosses like in the, I guess, more Mega Man or Kirby style, in comparison to what Mario normally has. Like a boss that you actually have to shoot with bullets is strange in the context of Mario. But I did like it. I liked that the last boss of the game was like a 2-phase boss.
Yeah,
like it
bullet
was
hell
weird.
thing.
Yeah, it was a thing that you do not see very often in these games. And to wrap my second point into it, give Mario back a submarine, give Mario back an aeroplane. I want these side-scrolling levels again. Because they make the underwater levels bearable when you put them in a vehicle that has defenses and stuff.
Yeah. I feel like the vehicle style bosses feel very un-Mario, so I feel like they won't ever do that. But like I don't know. You could theme it as like a power up, I guess. Like I don't know, maybe. But it is weird to have the mix because you have like the typical like you had to jump over the boss and get to the trap door thing, to raise the drawbridge or whatever, like the classic Bowser style boss. And then you just have like the vehicle like kind of shoot 'em up style one. So it is a weird mix. And like it is kind of interesting though that like. That you are able, like, if you have the fire flower or whatever the variant of the fire flower in this game is, where the ball bounces, that like if you have that, you can kill the boss with it. But like ordinarily, like you're just supposed to jump over it. Like I think that's kind of interesting. Like it's very simple game design, but I like that there's a choice, or like you can have an advantage if you're skilled enough to keep the power up. So I don't know. Like I mean, that's about as much as I have to say about. The bosses.
Yeah, that's fair. And I agree with most of it. I think that there is two things. One, I don't know. I assumed that it was just supposed to be a fire flower in this game. I know that it's been called, and so maybe is canonically this, in the Mario Maker games, is referred to as, I think, a Super Ball, which is... And the thing that I like about the Mario Maker implementation of it is that it works in the same way where if there's one on screen, you can't throw another one, which was a projectile limitation in the first game in Super Mario Land, and is just kept as like a mechanical wrinkle to the power up in Mario Maker, which is great. I like that they did that. It was cute, and I enjoy the callback. But that's all on that. The thing that I wanted to say, the last thing I want to say about bosses is just like, I found it so funny that the two bosses that were not shoot 'em up bosses were like, the screen stops scrolling, you're in an arena, you shoot them. They're unmistakably bosses. But like, there's a boss, like the boss of the Egypt level is the Sphinx. And you jump over him and you hit the thing and he dies. And also right before him, there are two other enemies that also sit and shoot fireballs.
Right.
And it's like, I'm imagining in my head the like instruction booklet illustration of the Sphinx, and it's like menacing, but it's not Nintendo, so it's drawn in that like cartoony, like Bowser-y style. And then you get into the game and it's like indistinguishable from the two regular enemies right before it.
Yeah.
And it's just this contrast that cracks me up. That is just something that you have to, I guess, deal with when you're playing old games.
Yeah, the limited sprite sheet
Yeah.
limitations, yeah.
He's quite a Sphinx, let me tell you. I don't even know what the last boss is. It like starts as a cloud.
Is it? Yeah, it's like a guy in a plane.
Yeah, and then it's like a
some
guy in a plane.
You know.
It's the ultimate villain of Super Mario Land is a guy. The military industrial complex.
The villain is actually Luigi. He kidnapped
Oh,
Daisy,
yeah. That is right.
who makes her first appearance in this game.
That's true. And with the very confusing text, "Oh, Daisy." That's it.
Yeah.
It just says, "Oh, Daisy." And then when it's actually Daisy, it says, "Oh, Daisy, Daisy."
Right. Yeah, the translation team maybe dropped the ball on that one.
Yeah. Or they just couldn't fit that much.
Yeah.
Like,
Or,
I don't
yeah,
know. Maybe they just didn't try.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it is kind of confusing what is meant.
Yeah. But, you know, it's fine. It's 1989.
Whoopsie daisy.
Do we have Easter Island thoughts?
My Easter Island thoughts are, yeah, I think one of the first things I said really sums it up is that this game is surprisingly playable. Yeah, I knew what the game looked like. I hadn't played it really since I was like 10 or something. And I never really played it that much. So like I didn't really know what to expect. But like I was ready for it to be janky and hard and finicky in the way that you might think like a Game Boy platformer would be. But it really isn't for the most part. It's fairly solid. The further into it you get, the more that I think it gets a little bullshit. But, you know, I think surprisingly keeps that to a minimum and is actually pretty solidly designed, you know, as Mario games tend to be. Yeah, the music is really great and nostalgic. I think that lived up to the series standards. And like, there were a couple interesting little bits, and maybe it's just because of my familiarity with Mario, but like, there were a handful of things that were different that really struck me and seemed interesting, like Koopa's exploding instead of, you know, being jumped on and like shot off across the screen, the checkpoint system, it's et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I found like for a very simplistic platformer released before I was born, like this like wasn't unplayable or terrible in the way like some old games are. Like it didn't feel cryptic. It felt intuitive like Mario does. So like you can really, yeah, like see, you can trace that like secret sauce that Nintendo's kind of always had all the way back to this. Even with the Game Boy limitations, they were still making stuff a lot better than everyone else at the time. So, yeah, like I don't know. I don't know if I'd say I was pleasantly surprised, but like I ended up enjoying it more than I expected to. So I don't know. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I get that feeling 100%. Like, I don't want to call it pleasantly surprised because like I played the game before, most of it, as it turns out, and had a memory of it being good, but I also have a memory of everything else that I played as a kid being garbage. So I was surprised to an extent, and it was amusing because I mean this is like honestly like maybe 2 hours of game here. There's 12 levels. And to me, like the worst part of it, like the thing that shows its age the most is just infidelity of control. Like that's just not a thing that the Game Boy is really capable of doing in the same way that later platforms were. And that's the only, but otherwise, like it is shockingly a Mario platform. And is about as good as you could expect from the time, and better even than you would normally expect from 1989. So yeah, I also enjoyed it. I thought I fucking cranked up the volume. I was playing it on a Game Boy Advanced SP. So as loud as that volume will go, which is not extremely loud, but it was a great. I had a great time vibing with this game more so than a lot of other things. And also, man, it felt good to play it as episode 100 of Pocket because it made me realize just how far we had strayed. Because I remember us like playing, recording, and editing an episode of Pocket, one of the early episodes, in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it was like the Kirby episode or something.
That would make sense.
Yeah, and just like both of us beat the game on the same cartridge, like separately. Then we recorded it, then we edited it. You had made the art, and we put it out like within a 24-hour period. And I was like, man, that just ain't what we do anymore. So it felt good and nostalgic, not only to the older days of playing Game Boy games, but to us. Doing the podcast. It was nostalgic for a time when we had any idea what the Pocket branding was supposed to mean. So I give this game, I recommend this game, and I recommend the NOCLIP Podcast. Thank you for listening to every single episode of NOCLIP Pocket in a row
This week.
this week.
What are we talking about next time?
This is a question that we'll have to answer at some point. So typically on the Discord we keep like the two current games that we're talking about, and then the next games for both the main and Pocket. So next time we're technically talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. But what is replacing the Pocket, and would have been a Pocket episode had we not done this, or if like just numbering fell one different, is Echoes of the Eye, the DLC for Outer Wilds.
Right.
So I believe what we'll do is probably just continue announcing the very next episode at the end of the episodes, and then but still keep two ahead on Discord so that people can be like aware of what's coming up. It's part of sort of the book club. The contract of book club is that people need to actually know what they're doing.
Right. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Hell yes. Until that time, you can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com or on splattershot.pro. There you can find links to our Twitter account, our email address, and the Discord server where we're going to have 2 episodes out game announcements. So fucking, yeah, you better join up. Jump. And you can listen to all of our old episodes, including all 100 episodes of NOCLIP Pocket, including ones that we did on Super Mario Land. We talked about Super Mario Wonder, Kirby's Dream Land, Super Mario 3D World, and Bowser's Fury.
Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
Yeah, we did do that one as well. There's literally like an infinite number of platform games.
We do have
essentially.
a platformers and Metroidvanias playlist, so you can peruse
That's true.
that.
I sure have not made any more of this.
Whatever.
Stay tuned. Maybe I will. Not soon, though. Goodbye.
Hat in time.
No pocket. But not gonna do it anymore.